So that's
Oh, there it is. It's okay. Cheers. Put that at the end. There it is.
Maybe somebody.
Yes. We can have 3 speakers and we can have 2 interviews. So I don't know if there'll be time, but certainly we can get time. Yeah.
3 minutes, right?
We're live, everything's working. Sometimes the pronunciation is different. Make sure I got it.
Yeah, so.
Question. The front row. Yeah, so. Email says it's going to be late, so okay. All right? Yeah. We can put you on early. Oh, okay. Yeah. I did. Okay. I just wanted to make him feel that he didn't need to rush over. I see. Okay. One thing I forgot. Brian said it.
Oh, yeah. No, it's not like that.
So this is being recorded. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the side event sponsored by the Major Economies Business Forum on Energy Security and Climate Change. My name is Steve Yulee. I'm with the Institute for 21st Century Energy at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I welcome you all here. We have a great lineup of speakers today. And so instead of hearing me draw on and on, we're just going to plunge right into it. What we want to do today is cover how businesses are dealing with the INDCs in various countries. So we have Hiro Tezuki to my left. He's going to talk about Japan's business experience with the Japanese INDC and what they have planned. To his left is Ali Agumi from CGEM, the Morocco business group, and he's going to be talking about the experience in Morocco. I'm going to be the third speaker, and I'm going to talk about something I think a lot of you are going to be interested in, is what the Trump administration might mean for the energy sector in the U.S. and also for the Paris Agreement, which I know is an issue of great concern to many of you. And then we will have two respondents later on, and I will introduce them when the time comes. So I'm going to turn it over now to Hiro Tezuki. He's with Kedandran, and I will load his slides and get ready. So Hiro, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. My name is Hiro Tezuka. I'm chairing the International Environmental Strategy Committee on Keidanren, Japan Business Federation. Today, I'd like to share our experience about probably first, I'm going to show you the history of Japanese business sector's contribution to the whole this climate change process, even before Paris Agreement. Then explain a little bit about how we engage into the INDC preparation process, and also share the issues to be covered in the future. The first of all, the Paris Agreement is somewhat very much similar to what we have been doing within Japan. As you may all know, that the Paris Agreement is basically the bottom-up commitment by each countries. On the left side of the chart, countries pledging their own contribution to the United Nations. Then what we are talking in this conference is that how we are going to make this process transparent, and what would be the reporting process, what would be the evaluation process, something like that. But that is what we have already done in Japan among industry sectors, because our Keidanren's business action plan consists of the similar kind of image. That is, industries are submitting our own determined, the voluntarily determined commitment and submit it to the government, and then they get the verification process every year. So this is basically pledge and review process. This is how we are handling this issue. The companies are submitting the yearly annual-based achievement and the numerical and the non-numerical the contribution to the industry organization such as steel, chemical, petrol, the automobile, and so forth. Then industry organizations the consolidated the result and make the summary report submit to the Keidanren, which is Japan Business Federation. Then Keidanren took the consolidated result, passed through the two committees. One is Keidanren's own the evaluation committees, consist of academia, professors, and some environmental NGOs and civil society representatives. And then also the government organized a governmental third-party council, which is also further put the verification process of each industry sector's achievement. Then the final report is submitted to the government to be accepted. So we continue this process yearly, even before the Paris Agreement in the past 5-6 7 years. Actually, we started this process during the Kyoto Protocol era. Then moving forward, we have a two-phase, the continuing the activities. That is Kedarlen's commitment to low carbon society. The first phase is aiming at 2020, and the second phase is aiming at 2030s. And the first pillar is obviously our domestic and own emission from the production facilities. That is following the process as I explained already. But we also have put pretty much emphasis on the second and third and fourth pillars. Second pillar is contribution through the low carbon products, because the production facilities are emitting, using energies and emitting the GHG gas. But the products coming out of that facilities are being used by the consumers for the energy savings, fuel efficient cars, fuel efficient the trains, or whatever the devices to be more effective for the consumers. So the product contribution and how come up with such kind of low carbon products are the very important mission of the business. The third pillar is international contributions. As you may have already known, Japan is one of the very energy efficient country in industry sectors. So we are very much committed to get involved in the tech transfer project, so that we can share our energy saving technologies as much as possible with the neighboring the countries. So that's a third pillar. And the fourth pillar is obviously the R&D. So we do need more the technology innovation to comply with the Paris Agreement long-term the target. So we are now more than 50 industry sectors submitted this kind of the commitment. Then the yearly based assessment process. We are following the yearly based assessment as I mentioned. I skipped this chart. As for the INDC process, Japan submitted our INDC July 2015. But before that, we had a fairly intensive consultative the process, particularly because the Japan's GHG emission, more than 90% of Japan's GHG emission comes from energy relating, from energy consumption. But as you all know, that we are having the huge earthquake in 2011, which shut down all the nuclear, which is one of the biggest contributor to the low carbon energy supply in Japan, that period. So we do need to have the long-term energy supply plan before coming up with any the INDC number. So the government established the January 2015 on a committee for Japan's energy mix. Then the Kedarlen Business Federation deeply involved in this both energy mix committee as well as INDC committee so that the government can come up with the pragmatic, achievable, realistic numbers in combination with ideal energy supply, assuring economic growth, energy security, and environmental integrity. So the process was pretty intensive, and we held probably more than 20-30 committee meetings. Then finally, June 2015, Japan came up with long-term, the mid-term and long-term energy mix target. Then the 1 month later, we have completed the INDC process. The business contributed this whole process. Sorry. the lessons we learned from this whole process is that this is purely the bottom-up approach because all industry sectors are having our own the programs to complete to realize the Japan's INDC number by 2030. So we obligate our own the stories. Then this is something the example that this is a part of the Japan's INDC the annex pages. The iron and steel industry, chemical industry, and other industries are raised our own measures to be taken in the next 15 years or so. So it's very specifically specific and the bottom up and yeah, the process. A lot of BATs are to be used, and basically what we are going to do is the using or diffuse and implement all the possible BATs, best available technologies in the next 10-15 years. That's a story. So in summary, the business can and should contribute to this climate change, the issues in many aspects. First, proactive action plan in tackling climate change. Second, development and implementation of the INDCs, and the business is a part of INDC in case of Japan. Then enhancing low carbon technology development, which is a key for the ambitious goal to be achieved. Then fourth, promoting tech transfer. This is a global base, the solution. But obviously there are many issues to be taken care of. Of course, the bottom-up approach is a realistic, and because we know how to achieve, but assumption behind is that all the possible scenarios can be achieved within the timeline, but there must be many contingencies or unexpected phenomena happens. For example, the economic crisis or natural disasters such as an earthquake, huge earthquake, or even after the earthquake attack, we are still only 3 out of 50 reactors, nuclear reactors, idling waiting for the safety permission from the government. And it's very uncertain how many nuclear reactors are coming back on stream between now and 2030. So that is a contingencies, and of course the risks of Japanese INDCs, but that's a reality, so must be shared among the members. Okay, that's all I prepared, and hand over to Shijen.
Thank you, Hiro. Does anyone have any questions for Hiro? Yes, ma'am. We have a box.
You are the present.
You are indeed a gentleman. I'm Vanya Walker-Lee, a reporter from the Malta Business Weekly. Sorry I arrived late, but it's difficult to be punctual at this conference. Could you just repeat the figure you said about Japan's emissions? 90% are from the energy sector. And could you tell us more about developing energy efficiency policies and renewable energies now that the prices of solar are going down all the time?
90% of GHG emission of Japan originally come from energy consumption. So energy consumption, including natural gas or coal or whatever. So that's the number I shared with you. Our INDC for 2015 and 2030 is based on a Japanese energy mix target by 2030, and that include around 25% renewables, around 20% nuclear. Then the rest the fossil fuel. So that is a number Japan come up with to achieve the 25% emission reduction by 2030 as compared with 2013. That is a base year of Japan. So the risks I raised is that the assuming the 20 to 23% nuclear can only achieve by the running the more than 20 reactors, which are still idling right now. So that is a reality. Around 25% the renewables is another very big challenge because we still have I don't really know the exact number, maybe 15% of something, including hydro. Yeah. So we need to expand the renewable ratio, 22 to 24% the renewables. Also, that is assuming the very massive energy efficiency improvement between now and then. So the total energy consumption must be reduced by about more than 17%. Sorry. So even not only the industry, but the household, the transportation, the service industry, everyone need, as a consolidated base, need to improve more than the 17% of the total energy consumption to achieve that number.
Great, thank you, Hiro. We're going to move on now to our next speaker. I'll call up his presentation. It's Ali Agumi. He's the counselor on climate to CGEM, which is the General Confederation of Moroccan Industry. It's something different in French, and I'm not about to start that, but I think Ali might be able to fill us in on that. He's going to talk about the private sector experience in Morocco with the INDC. And there we go. Ali, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I hope you will be able to hear me because I have a very small problem of voice. You can hear me, yes? Yes, okay. Well, of course, thank you very much for your invitation, and I hope the experiences of Morocco on climate change in the private sector could interest the participant to this side event. Of course, as a developing country, our context is completely different in the private sector, in particular on these aspects. From Japan, for example, Morocco is another type of country. We are, our emission of greenhouse gases are very limited, but we are very vulnerable. That's why in our INDC, we have the two parts. The first part concerns the mitigation, and Morocco has for 2030 reduction of 42%, which is in the INDC, 17% unconditional and 25% conditional. But beside this, in the INDC of Morocco, you have the adaptation aspect, and on this, the most vulnerable sector, which are water, agriculture, forest, and fishery. For this, we have a portfolio of adaptation project and the policy, which will be implemented until 2030, and which are developed in our INDC. During the preparation of Moroccan INDC, private sector has been involved by the government. Well, qualitatively, let's say, the involvement. And now, since last year, the private sector is invited to support government in the implementation of the commitment. And also, of course, the private sector of Morocco try to take this opportunity to initiate the low carbon and the resilient climate change economy, and to let companies, Moroccan companies, involved in this dynamic. That's why, from our view in Morocco, private sector said, first of all, if we want companies and enterprises to be able to support government in this dynamic, first of all, we have to support them by capacity building initiative. That's what we call MBCI, Moroccan Business Capacity Initiative. And this initiative has four main goals. The first one is to let companies and enterprises in Morocco integrating climate risks and opportunities in their development plan. The second goal is to propose them technical, technological, and financial solutions which they can use in this approach. The third one is to support through this all activities in the private sector, the facility to the private sector to reach this new economy and to be initiated to this new economy. And the fourth goal is to try to support the commitment of business to climate issue by subscribing to a chart, climate chart, or in the beginning, climate level. Morocco private sector initiative has two steps. The first one, as I said, is capacity building approach. It will take 2 years, 2015, 2018. And of course, as a different initiative of capacity building, we have sensitization, we have support, training, and development. But this first phase should allow Moroccan sector, private sector, to be ready in 2019 to have something which is more concrete, which concern sectorial climate change approach, territorial climate change approach. I'm speaking about the private sector, of course, synergy between public and private, and the way how to let it dynamic and effective to help, of course, to arrive to INDC Morocco commitment, and of course, at the end, to promote synergy at the international level between private sector of Morocco and the other private sector. For 2007 and 2018, we have then a program which is very important for private sector companies: awareness, training, support, development. I can give you, excuse me, before maybe I can go back to this program. Awareness and information program for effective awareness about the risk and opportunity offered by climate change. It can be for you evident, but for private sector and in particular SME of Morocco, it's something they have to understand concretely. That's why it was important to have a specific program to lead them in this dynamic. And the same for training, to have local expertise which could support this private sector in the way to have this climate change approach. Support, we have activities with the pilot activities in 6 sectors in the private sector. For each of these sectors, we will support companies to have, first of all, visibility on their emission, their attenuation program possible, the characterization of their vulnerability and adaptation possibility approach for these enterprises. And at the end, in the support, we will, with them, take one project, adaptation or mitigation by sector, and will bring them until financing donor or financing fund to let them know exactly what is the process. Besides this, and this capacity, in this capacity building step, we have some deep study which are in the beginning now of their implementation. which concern the analysis of the private sector, in Morocco, of course, sector by sector and territory by territory, then their risk, their opportunities, and their capability to adapt and to take into account the commitment of the government taken under Paris Agreement. At the same time, we have also we have since the beginning of 2007 led the Confederation of Private Sector Enterprise to join the convention as not a member negotiator but observer, and in this way we have now a committee of negotiators from the private sector, because we know that in the next step the private sector will have an important role even in the negotiation, and you know that. For the implementation of this initiative, we have put a framework of governance of the implementation of this initiative with the climate task force, linked to the presidents of CGRM, technical committee climate change, and local climate point, focal point at different confederation and at different region of Morocco. And with all this, we have a tool who is implementing the initiative, which is Moroccan Center of Clean Production. I will be very short, but I wanted just to show you what we have done since the beginning of the year. It can give you an idea of our ambition. We have now a monthly newsletter for the private sector on what's happened on climate change and business nationally and internationally. We are on the fourth numero of this newsletter. We have a website which is operational, and I invite you to go and to see exactly what we are doing. We are elaborating a guide which will help enterprises, Moroccan and in particular SME, to know exactly if they want to take into account climate risk and opportunity in their development, how to proceed with the footprint, identification of mitigation approach, characterization of vulnerability, etc., and go and tell the way how to go to financing. We have a debate every month since January, and before during all 2006, because we were preparing the COP22, as you know, held in Marrakesh. And at the end, we have decided to have annual forum of private sector, climate private sector in Morocco. The next one is on 6th July in Casablanca. 2 minutes. 2 minutes or 2 seconds? Okay.
We will give you a third.
Okay. Well, it will be enough for me. Well, just to let you, what you see this table, I invite you just to see the green title there. They are the topics which we had this last month during this debate, evening debate. The first one was the way how private sector could support government in INDC in implementation. The second one on the new climate jobs. The last week we had one on transport, logistics, and climate change, and we are going on during the 2 years, sector by sector and approach by approach. That concern the training acts which are under development, technical support I spoke about, and development. And about these development axes, I wanted to go back to something which is important. During Marrakesh COP, business community of 42 countries, developed and developing countries, has launched a network which is called MBA for Climate, Marrakesh Business Action for Climate. And the first meeting was in Marrakesh with the Declaration of Business Community, as you know. And this MBA for Climate is supported by BISMEF, And our next meeting will be held during the Moroccan Forum in Casablanca on the 6th July, with one objective, which is to prepare COP23 and to prepare the coordination between business community in developed and developing country or around the way how these negotiations are going on the implementation of Paris Accord. That shows you clearly that the first big study is going on. It concerns the challenge of Moroccan private sector opportunities related to climate change. You can understand that in Morocco, this big study, sectorial and regional, doesn't exist until now, but normally during the forum, the first result of this study will be discussed between different actors. If you want more information, you can go to website of CGM, in which you have all about our initiative. Thank you very much.
I think we have time for one question. Anybody have a question? Mr. Gumi? No? Okay, well, thank you very much. And I'm very happy that you were able to tell us about the MBA for climate. I must say that CGM was a great host at the COP in Marrakesh. And we're very proud to have them as a partner in the BISMEF group. So I am going to speak now about the current situation in the United States and what the election might mean for the Paris Agreement. And let's see. No. All right. So what can we expect? The last time there was a big meeting was in Marrakesh. It was shortly after election. That was President-elect Trump at that point. Now we have a President Trump. So I thought I'd go over some of the issues that are facing the Trump administration, some of the decisions the Trump administration has to make. By the way, I see a lot of people taking pictures of the slides. That's perfectly okay. But when I get back to Washington, these slides will all be posted on the BISMEF website, www.majoreconomiesbusinessforum.org. So we will have all the presentations will be posted there. Okay, so let's go into it. So then candidate Trump made an important speech in North Dakota during the campaign and covered 4 issues: energy independence, coal, and the Paris Agreement. So I'm going to go through each one of these statements by then candidate Trump. On energy independence, he said, under my presidency, we will accomplish complete American energy independence. We'll become totally independent of the need to import energy from the oil cartel or any nation hostile to our interest. So let's take a look at that. Is energy independence within reach? The short answer is yes, it is. Surprisingly enough, a lot of people don't realize this, but in mind, this chart shows the net energy imports as a share of total U.S. energy demand from 1950 to 2035. As you can see, in the early 50s, the U.S. was a net energy producer. But since the 50s, we become more of an energy importer, and that's largely due to imports of oil, but in some cases, natural gas as well. And you can see by about 2005, we were importing about 30% of our energy supply. And then the shale gale came. And we've been producing massive quantities, massive increases in natural gas and crude oil. And you can see from about 2005 to about 2015, the share of US energy that we're importing now is roughly about 10%. And the Energy Information Administration, back in 2008, that's the green dash line, they were estimating back then that we would still be importing about 25 to 30% of our energy. They now estimate that by 2026, US will be once again a net producer of energy. So Mr. Trump was onto something. We are going to be a net energy producer, but that still doesn't mean that we're not going to be importing crude oil. We will be. This is the shale gale that I described to you. This is production of oil in crude oil in blue and natural gas in red. As you can see, both those have been increasing quite rapidly since 2005, and even with the downturn in the price of energy that we saw recently over the last couple of years, oil and natural gas production in the U.S. is still very high, and we expect that to continue. Why is this important? Why does the Trump administration care about this? Well, energy independence is a big deal for him. And energy security is a big deal from him. If you look at this chart, all the blue are the part of the U.S. crude oil supply from North America. So this includes U.S. production conventional, U.S. production unconventional, and imports from Mexico and Canada. You can see in 2005, we're about 55% of our crude oil supply was from North America. Today, it's between 75 and 80%. That's a huge change. And it's one that the Trump administration is going to embrace. You can count on it. Trump administration is also concerned about trade and trade balances, and certainly energy is going to be a big contributor to reducing America's trade deficit. This shows you what we're thinking about, what the Energy Information Administration was projecting in 2008. That's the green dashed line. How much of our crude oil would be imported, supply would be imported. It was about 10 million barrels a day. EIA was projecting out to 2030. Today, the estimate is more along the lines of about 6.5 million barrels of crude oil a day. This is having a tremendous impact on our balance of trade. Same thing with natural gas. At one point, it was projected that we would be importing about 10 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas. And that essentially we would be walking down the same path with crude oil, with natural gas that we had walked down with crude oil, and be a very large importer of natural gas. That hasn't turned out that way because of the shale revolution. In the United States, next year, the U.S. is going to be a net exporter of natural gas, something no one expected 10 years ago. So these are big issues for the Trump administration. You also have to remember that the Trump administration is very concerned with U.S. manufacturing and giving U.S. manufacturers a competitive edge. This helps U.S. manufacturing. Okay, let's go take a look at what he said about coal at that North Dakota speech. Coal, we're going to bring back the coal industry and save the coal industry. I love those people. He does too. And let's see what he's done. So this is a list of recently finalized regulations. Most of these were promulgated under the Obama administration. I'm not going to go through this entire list, but a good number of these regulations impacted the coal industry. So let's take a look at what's going to happen under the Trump administration. A lot of these regulations are going to go away. A lot of them are going to go away. Well, there are many, many different ways some of these are going to go away. Some of them are going to go away by acts of Congress. Some of them are going to go away because the Trump administration is essentially going to reverse engineer some of these regulations. In other words, they're going to go through a regulatory process to either change the regulation or get rid of the regulation. So this is going to have a tremendous impact on coal use in the United States. Remember, Trump promised the coal industry that he was going to protect their jobs, and he's going to take that promise seriously. So what does this mean? Can Trump help coal country? Yes, he can. This chart, every year, the Energy Information Administration does a reference case forecast. For the last couple of years, they've been doing a forecast with the EPA Clean Power Plan, which is the Obama administration, the centerpiece of the Obama administration's INDC, which was designed to regulate CO2 from existing power plants and from new power plants as well. EIA also runs a forecast without CPP, and so you just compare the output of the two models, and you can come up with an idea of where of the impact that the Clean Power Plan would have on the coal industry. So the Clean Power Plan is going away. EPA Administrator Pruitt has, President Trump signed an executive order instructing Administrator Pruitt to get rid of the Clean Power Plan, and that will probably be done through a regulatory process. Once the Clean Power Plan goes away, the EIA projects that coal production will stay essentially flat through 2035. So the aim of revitalizing the coal industry, coal is never going to come back to 50% of the U.S. power sector, but it will chug along at about 30% for the next decades without the Clean Power Plan in place. So you can say that President Trump is on his way to fulfilling at least part of his campaign promise for the coal industry. So why does I'm sorry, this is coal share in the U.S. power generating sector under two scenarios, the with CPP scenario and the without CPP scenario. And as you can see that With CPP, natural gas kind of takes over from coal. Coal starts to decline. But without CPP, that's the bottom chart. You can see that coal and natural gas maintain about 30 to 35% share of power generation in the United States. So why does all this matter? Why does Trump see energy as such an advantage to the United States? It's pretty easy. Energy in the United States is vastly more affordable than energy in many of our OECD competitors. If you take a look at the price of natural gas for industry, the U.S., from the information I've been able to glean, there's only one country with cheaper natural gas, that's Canada. Electricity prices for industry, pretty much the same thing. Norway and Sweden both have cheaper electricity than industry in the United States, and both of those have large amounts of hydroelectric power. And steam coal prices for industry. Poland is about the only country out there in the OECD that has a cheaper price than the United States. I can't overemphasize to you that this competitive energy edge, how important it is for the Trump administration. I mean, you have to understand this when you think about what it is the Trump administration is going to do. All right, so let's go to the last one, the Paris Agreement. Then Canada, Trump said, we're going to cancel the Paris Climate Agreement and stop all payments of United States tax dollars to UN global warming programs. Okay, well, we always have Paris. Well, that's what we're about to find out. One thing we've said for a long time is that the Obama administration climate actions were not durable. We've always said if we want to have a durable climate policy in the United States, you have to involve Congress. President Obama went with a phone and a pen approach where he used executive action and regulation as the way to reduce emissions. And he bypassed Congress. That's not the way to have a durable climate policy in the United States. So let's take a look at the INDC. The Obama administration pledge was a 26 to 28% cuts in net greenhouse gas emissions by 2025 from 2005 level. It was unrealistically ambitious. It had no congressional input. This was done by the Obama administration alone. They had no plan to meet it, and I will go talk about that in a minute. And some actions that were central to the INDC relied on abusing existing regulatory authorities, in other words, stretching the Clean Air Act beyond all recognition. An indication of that is the fact that the Supreme Court of the United States put a stay on the Clean Power Plan. That was unprecedented. That has never happened before in the United States, which shows you the fine line that the Obama administration is walking with EPA and its regulatory approach. And I mentioned earlier that Trump is revisiting the Clean Power Plan through a regulatory process. So this is a chart that I just did recently. I've done these for a couple of years now, taking a look at the Obama administration's pledge, Paris pledge, and the gap between the pledge and the policies in place to meet the pledge. When President Obama left office, I calculated that if you take into account all the things that were in place, it would include CAFE standards for new cars. I even included the Clean Power Plan, the Kigali Agreement covering HFCs, the Aviation Agreement in ICAO, methane regulations. I calculated that about 37% of the goal was still unaccounted for. And which means that if you take a look at where the Obama policies would lead, by 2025, I was predicting that they would get to about the 2020 goal, which is 7% reduction below 2005 emissions. Nowhere near the 26 to 28%. Now, when you take into account that the Trump administration has promised to do away with the Clean Power Plan, it's going to revisit some of the methane regulations and some other things. There's no way that I can see that the U.S. is going to meet a 26 to 28% target by 2025. And I think you also have to consider if the Trump administration is able to get the economy growing at 3% instead of the 2.2% it's been growing, that will make emissions, it will make it even more difficult to meet the Paris Agreement, the Paris Pledge. Okay, so what will the Trump administration do? So these are some of the issues that the Trump administration is struggling with now. First of all, it's very important that Trump ran as a unusual candidate, and a lot of his supporters were frustrated with Republicans who said stuff on the campaign stump but then didn't follow through when they got into office. Trump said he wasn't going to be a typical politician and he was going to keep his campaign promises. And one of the promises he made to an important constituency of his, the coal guys, is that he was going to get us out of the Paris Agreement. Another question they're pondering: how will the courts rule on inevitable court challenges? Green groups in the United States are flush with money since the Trump administration came into office. They're going to spend that money taking the Trump administration to court. And so the question that the legal beagles in the White House and other agencies are asking: can the courts compel compliance? Can the courts derail President Trump's deregulatory agenda? Can future administrations use the agreement to justify new regulations that they might not be able to justify otherwise? Another question they're asking: does staying in Paris reward Obama's disregard of constitutional norms? You can't underestimate how important this is for a big chunk of President Trump's constituency. And the question revolves around: is Paris a treaty or is it? If it's a treaty, it should have been sent to the Senate. If it's not a treaty, well, maybe not. But that's a question that they're asking themselves. Does staying in the Paris Agreement require the administration to do certain things? Must it finance the Green Climate Fund? Candidate Trump said he wasn't going to finance the Green Climate Fund. But does staying in require that the U.S. do? Does staying in require the U.S. to submit a 2030 pledge? Well, the clear reading of the agreement is yes. But will Trump administration do that? That's a question they're going to have to sort out. There's a question: if the deal is lopsided and it puts the U.S. at a competitive disadvantage. It's no secret that China, India, and Russia, if you actually examine their pledges, they're pretty much doing business as usual. And also, doing something risks the affordable energy and the manufacturing agenda that Trump finds very, very important. They're going to wonder what are the diplomatic repercussions of the various options. There's been talk about maybe renegotiating the treaty to get a better deal for the U.S. I'm not sure what renegotiation actually means. And if the Obama INDC pledge is rejected, what should the new pledge be? So, I mean, these are all the sorts of questions, and you could probably come up with questions your own. But these are sorts of questions that the Trump administration is struggling with. There are people on all sides of the issues in the Trump administration. And to be honest with you, everybody expected that he was going to make a decision on Paris very, very early in his administration. I said, no, it's going to take some time because there are all these issues that they have to sort out. And so then the next question is, what are the options that the Trump administration has? And these are the options that are. And I'll kind of handicap what I think might happen. By the way, by giving you this presentation, I don't have any special insight into what is going on in the Trump White House. But I do know that these are some of the things that are being talked about. So they can withdraw from the Paris Agreement using the Article 28 process. Today, that's about a 3.5-year process. If I had to handicap this, I would say this is in the running, but it's not likely, but it's in the running. They could send the agreement to the Senate with a recommendation that it did not ratify it. This isn't likely. However, if they were to do that and the Senate rejected it, that would certainly block the courts from enforcing compliance or allowing future administrations to use it to justify new rules. And politically, it doesn't repeat the same mistake that the political mistake that the Bush administration made with regard to the Kyoto Protocol. If you recall, Bush left the Kyoto Protocol. He should have sent it to the Senate. By not sending it to the Senate, all the blame was on President Bush. When the truth is there was no political backing for Kyoto, not just in the Bush administration, but in the Senate and the House as well. So they could send it up to the Senate. Now, some folks have said because they don't agree that legally, from the U.S. perspective, the agreement rises to the level of a treaty. They say doing so would set a precedent that other presidents would have to follow regarding to this. So there's one point of view that says if you send it to the Senate, you actually limit the options for future presidents as they consider what is and is not a treaty. A third option is withdrawal from the UN Framework Convention entirely. I don't think this is likely, but this would be a one-year process. It would get the U.S. out of not only out of Paris, but out of the Framework Convention. Another option is stay in Paris with the Obama administration pledge. This ain't going to happen. It would jeopardize America's manufacturing renaissance. We've done some analysis with other groups, taking a look at what it would actually mean for the industrial sector, for example, to meet the Paris pledge, and the numbers are very, very high. costs very high, not only in lost economic growth, but jobs as well. So that's not going to happen. Stay in Paris with the revised pledge, more in line with reality. This is a position that's gained a lot of traction in Washington. The idea would be that we would stay in, but we would submit a revised INDC, which would be much less ambitious than the 26 to 28% Obama goal. I think everybody should understand it's likely that there's not going to be additional U.S. money going to the Green Climate Fund anytime soon. I don't think the Obama administration is going to be submitting a request for funds for the Green Climate Fund, and I'm not so sure that the Congress would appropriate the money even if the administration did request it. And finally, should we expect the unexpected with President Trump? I think the answer might be yes. But what that would mean, we don't know. Remember, this is the guy who wrote The Art of the Deal. He's a deal maker. It's entirely possible that he could use the Paris Agreement as leverage in either other UN venues or to pursue other foreign policy goals. So I would not be surprised if there were a little horse trading going on surrounding the president's decision on the Paris Agreement. So that is kind of a broad overview of where we are in the United States, and kind of, I think, gives you a little idea of what some of the thinking is with the Trump administration, some of the issues that they're facing. And I'm going to stop there. And we do have some respondents, but I think we have time for a couple of questions before that. And so if anybody has a question, we have the box. So just please state your name and who you're with, and I can get them for you. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Ingo Pohl. I'm with here with the AITA, International Emissions Trading Association. And listening to you, I have the feeling that you and I exist in kind of like alternative universes, right? Because the world that I know is driven by very different things. I think it's a world driven by dramatically decreasing cost of solar, of storage, of exponential growth in these sectors, right? And I think, you know, I feel if I look at stock markets and prices of assets, right, which I think deliver objective information, right, I don't see coal companies in America share price increasing in expectation of any big future businesses, right? I see the value of those shares coming down, right? I don't believe that in administration that's going to be in office for another whatever 3.5 years is going to change long-term projections of energy, right? And just because a current president says something, right, it's not necessarily true. There's only one thing that I agree with, which is that America will be energy independent, right? But it's not because of coal, it's because of all the other things, right? And it's also because of the resistance of states against the politics of a federal administration, right? That is just trying to stay a different course, right? I think it's going to be, you know, things that like a governor of California is doing, and all the great entrepreneurs from Silicon Valley is doing, right? That this kind of like pledge, make America energy independent, will come true. But it's not that outdated agenda, right? And also, I think last point, just from a fiduciary perspective, right? Like we're talking to shareholders, right? I think what we need to worry about when it comes to, let's say, you know, coal is it's actually the opposite. It's like, how do we avoid too many of stranded assets? How do we avoid loss of shareholder value for those companies, right? But it's not an agenda of growth and investment in coal. It's like, it's about how do we get out of coal with a soft landing versus a crash landing. That, I think, is the question, right? And I was actually expecting to hear about that in these presentations and not about the opposite. That's more a comment, I think, not a question.
What I showed you is reality. I mean, you may not agree with the reality, but that's the reality. And that's the reality for...
I think your reality and Trump is like
I have the
disconnected.
floor now. I have the floor now. And that's the reality for the Trump administration. I'm not advocating one view or the other here. I'm explaining to you how the Trump administration views this. from my perspective. And I'm not the one who said I was going to bring back the coal industry. It was President Trump, then candidate Trump. This is their thinking. These are the sorts of things they're looking at. And, you know, if we want to talk about renewables, we can talk about renewables, but that is not high on President Trump's agenda. All right. What we have seen is a tremendous growth in the oil industry. You know, President Obama, his legacy was supposed to be the legacy of the green president. And you can argue that, yeah, it was. But he also presided over the biggest renewal in the U.S. oil and gas industry in probably 50 years, which is something he didn't expect. This is where the money is being invested. We're seeing tremendous production in natural gas and oil. The Trump administration is looking at this increase in oil and natural gas as a geopolitical and economic advantage to the United States. I mean, I know a lot of people in this room don't agree with that, but that's the way President Trump is thinking about these issues. And it's important that you understand that. And I understand when I speak about this in front of noise like this, I know there's a lot of resistance. And a lot of people want to pretend that this isn't happening, but it is happening. And you have to understand it. And if you don't understand it, then you're not going to understand what's going on in the United States. And you're going to be surprised when things happen in the United States that you don't like. This is the reality. Okay? So, thank you for the comment, though. So I think now we have two respondents, yeah? So we'd like to ask them to join us here at the table. We have Chairman of the SBI, Tomas Krashev, with us, and we have June Arima, who's formerly was a part of the Japan delegation to these climate talks and is now at the University of Tokyo. So Tomas, I think what we will do is start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, well, first I want to say, well, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm really pleased to be here as usually. It's the place where very good, sometimes even fascinating discussions happen. And well, as a matter of fact, I can only regret that I could not, as planned, be here for the entire event. And well, even this exchange that I could witness between the two gentlemen shows how interesting this debate was. But well, let me give just quick view on what I heard from other people. And indeed, well, the impact of the change of American policy, of US policy on the mood in these negotiations is pretty significant. But on the other hand, which is, by the way, my view, but also many others, is that, well, every country, well, makes choices. And those who are elected have their policies that must have attracted voters. And that's why these countries are sometimes changing what their predecessors were doing in policy. This is pretty obvious. But on the other hand, well, even though the US economy and the US contributions and the US psychological impact is huge, there are 196 others. And these 196 others will do what they consider appropriate to do. They will participate in all the policies that they have developed, and those they want to cooperate with others. So the concern here should be rather to keep talking to each other, to continue dialogue. And even if many think that the views of President Trump do not represent the views of the majority in this room or other rooms, etc., etc., yeah, I agree. This is the reality. And we can, of course, well, those who can criticize. It's definitely not my role to give any opinions, neither good nor bad, on anybody's policy. But there are people who are even supposed to propose some kind of judgments. Well, we'll see. We'll see what would be the final outcome. Because I don't think that any policy can change profitability of using cheaper sources of energy, if they are cheaper, of using more sustainable resources, if they are more sustainable, and deploying more resilience-oriented policies to build infrastructure, to build capacity, etc., etc. So I think that what we should do is not to try to reinterpret the reality, but live with it. Try to understand the reality and try to understand why and what happened. That's I think the one of the most tricky but very important aspects of this entire process. And of course, in this context, we attach very big attention and we value very much the participation of all those who have yellow badges, the observers, including those who represent private sector, those who represent science. I think you are representing science more than anything else, and those who represent civil society, etc., etc. Everybody has their role, and I think that the workshop we had last week on the the quite long title, but in general, how to make the participation of stakeholders making difference in this process and empowering the stakeholders really brought a lot of food for thoughts. Well, on one hand, we've heard a lot of very interesting ideas of what and how and who. We also heard very strong voices arguing that if there are representatives of private sector who are trying to make any profits on the use or production of fossil fuels, they should be excluded from this process as they do not follow or do not represent the values and the goals of this convention. Well, I fundamentally disagree with this kind of approach for many reasons. Not because I believe that fossil fuels are good. I don't think any fuel is good or bad. But because the only way we can make a difference is to have dialogue and is to keep talking to each other about the solutions rather than about who's good or who's bad. It's not the convention of good guys and bad guys. This is the place where people come with the whole variety of experiences, the whole variety of different, quite often conflicting interests, and that mostly applies to the governments participating in this process. And in this process, the solution is called consensus. And consensus does not mean that we are unanimous. We are not. Consensus means that we agree to live with all other views, with all other interests and we take them into account. We try to understand them, and we agree that some people might think differently. So I also fundamentally disagree with the demonstrated approach. I fundamentally disagree with the attempt to make this place the forum for campaigns. It is not the forum for campaigning. This is the forum for discussion. This is the forum for exchanging views, for learning from each other. And I'm sure that there is a lot that this process can benefit from the stakeholders, all of them, including those having quite extreme views. We have to be aware of these views. We have to address these views. But it does not mean that we should allow campaigns that would try to build the picture of any view being the only correct view. We've seen it in the past. It's not good. Well, I'll stop here. I'm sure Yun will also have his observations. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Tomas. That was very, very good. I agree with just about everything you said. And now I'm going to turn over to Juno Rima.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. And I'd like to talk about two things, about the first, business engagement, and the second, small comment about the US. And the first one, is business engagement. And in addressing the issue of business engagement in climate change mitigation, we have to start with fundamental question whether or not or how we are going to overcome the possible, say, challenges for simultaneously achieving energy security, environmental protection, and economic growth. These three objectives sometimes could have some conflict. So whether or not we're going to make our best efforts to balance these three objectives, or whether we're going to put climate change mitigation as a supreme and only objectives, setting aside other two objectives. And obviously, Japan, my country, is taking the former approach, namely the simultaneous achievement of 3 E's. And that kind of attitude fundamentally affects a government's position vis-a-vis business engagement in the climate change debate. And considering the business role in climate change mitigation, we have to recognize the fact that in Japan, for example, business sector's CO2 emissions is lower than 1990 level because of the incessant energy efficiency and technology mitigation, innovation or mitigation efforts, while the emissions from residential commercial sectors and transport sectors is higher than 1990 level. And also, though business sector is emitting CO2, but business sector is the only sector which can offer the solution for mitigation. So that is why business sector needs to be engaged in climate change mitigation and needs to be actively engaged in the dialogue with the government. So from that perspective, it somehow surprised me. Still, there is a debate whether business sector should be more engaged in this process, because I think that the answer is unequivocally yes. So, and that is particularly true for such areas as finance or technology or market mechanism or domestic policy formation and so on. I personally was engaged in the rulemaking of the Kyoto mechanism around 2000 or 2001. And at that time, the business engagement in that debate was less than sufficient. So that has led to very much, the monstrously complicated rulemaking in the Kyoto mechanism. And it has become a unwieldy, cumbersome process. So we need to avoid that situation. And in order to avoid such situation, we need to have a reality view from the business sectors. And Thomas, you mentioned a very much important point, and I was, to be frank, very much aghast and appalled with the ongoing debate of the so-called conflict of interest, which seems to have been very much hot topic last week and driven by several parties and several NGOs. But that is completely, how can I say, opposite direction from the spirit of the Paris Agreement. That is engagement and a wider participation of all the stakeholders, including industry and including even fossil fuel industries. Because to my mind, it is, whether you like or not, it is obvious that the world need to count on fossil fuel in the coming decades. Even though some people do not like that reality, but you know, they're looking at the billions of people who do not have an access to modern type of energy. It is more than obvious that fossil fuel, including coal, will continue to be used. Then fossil fuel industry needs to be a part of the solution. So expelling them from this debate is completely, to my mind, preposterous. So then I strongly agree with your final point that this forum should not be the area for campaigning. We need to have, you know, the sober debate and scientific debate discussion rather than, you know, emotional, say, recommendation or something like that. So that is my point about business engagement. And tiny point about US. And of course, I'm now out of the government, so I'm in a bit freer position to comment various things. So you have laid out all the possibilities and options. And of course, I have been personally engaged in this negotiation for such a long time. So if I may express my humble expectation vis-a-vis Trump administration, is that, yeah, I may, okay. Then I'd like to say that, yes, there could be some minor gap problems between the Obama's pledges and ongoing programs. And also this situation could be exacerbated by the weakening or cancellation of the Clean Power Plan or something. But these problems could be addressed by, say, putting revised NDCs rather than completely pulling out of the Paris Agreement. And the US voice is very much important in this negotiation because we have not still worked out the modalities and the rule books in order to make Paris Agreement operational. And US voice in such areas as, say, transparency mechanism or common framework or realistic market mechanism or something. If we completely lose US from this theater, then that will have very much, you know, the serious ramifications, I'm afraid. So rather than leaving completely from this theater, I want you to stay in this, say, process and to exercise, develop your own argument in order to, say, give some sense of reality to this process. So finally, of course, say, ultimately, it is up to President Trump himself. But let's hope that you know, we will not have to say adieu to you.
Well, thank you, June. Yeah, if I were to handicap, I'd say the discussion now is focusing on staying in with a less ambitious commitment or getting out of the Paris Agreement. I think those are of all the options I gave, those are probably the two most likely options that are on the table at this point. So. The president indicated that he would make a decision before the G7 meeting at the end of May. That has now been postponed. I thought politically that wasn't the most opportune time to do that. There's talk he may do it before the G20 meeting. My guess, and this is only a guess with no special insight, my guess the decision will probably come after the G20 meeting and not before the G20 meeting. There are a lot of issues that they have to work out. There's a lot of gears, a lot of agency equities and department equities that have to be considered. So I don't think this is a decision they're going to rush into. I think this is a decision going to take their time with and then get their ducks in a row and announce it. I think they're learning as they go along that they can't announce things without putting in place the public relations campaign in order to sell that. So I think they've learned their lesson, so I still think it's probably be a couple of months before we see anything. And I just want to comment on both your presentations. Spot on. I think this side event is a perfect example of that. Here we have Ali explaining the challenges of meeting an INDC in a developing country. Hiro talked about the impact of the closure of all the nuclear power plants and what that impact might have. And of course, in the United States, we have the impact of a new president. Very unexpected win by President Trump. And so these are the sorts of things we're dealing with too. So I think this is a perfect example of why it's important to have the business community in a room. When I look at the framework convention, I look at all the groups involved. I think a lot of them have the same views. And the business community is really the only group that has a broad, other than the parties themselves, I think, which has a broad disparity of views. And all of these are valid views too, by the way, and they need to be taken into consideration. So I think that's the value that the business community has. We bring a bunch of varied ideas to the table, and we bring our expertise and our experience. And at the end of the day, we're going to be the ones who are going to have to reduce the emissions. So Ali, you have a comment? Yeah? Oh, Tomas.
Just quick reaction to what my friend Jones has said. There's one thing that I would like to slightly disagree. And I slightly disagree with the statement that the private sector is the only sector that has the solutions. Yes, it has technological solutions, but the wide variety of solutions is needed. And technology is only one of these solutions. We need to change lifestyle. We need to better understand what is the role of the ecosystems in capturing the CO2 and reducing the concentration. And we have recently seen the report that tells that even the most stringent, most ambitious mitigation is not sufficient, that we need to reduce concentration, and there is no other way like just using the biosystem. I'm sure that there is a lot in interactions between the elements of entire climate system, which is not only the atmosphere, but it's also geosphere and hydrosphere that is linked by biosphere, by life. That's much more than just technology. And that's why we need everybody on board in this process. And that's why the concept of the conference of parties, this becomes much more than just the intergovernmental meeting of high-level officials and the politicians. It is, well, we talked about it last autumn in Paris in this meeting, that it's sort of converting into something like climate festival more and more, especially with this growing climate action part. So, well, that's why we need everybody.
Ali, you have a comment?
I wanted to add something to 2 points. The first one is the fact that at this situation now on the negotiation, we have American position and the way how it can maybe disturb our going on. But we have also something else, and we haven't to forget that the way how all the package is built, I mean, I'm speaking about Paris Agreement. Imagine that tomorrow, United States say everything is okay. We have to answer to this question. How shall we ready tomorrow at the end of 2018 with this tool boîte, as they say in French, which will allow us to implement Paris Agreement since 2020. How can we arrive? We are now at the middle of 2017, and we see in the negotiation that many points are very complicated. I want to come back to 2 points. The first one is transparency, and the second one in the Article 6. On these 2 points, things become very complicated, and I'm speaking as representative of private sector developing countries. We have had an experiences, for example, on CDM. We have had an experiences on adaptation during 20 years with not significant mechanisms which allow vulnerable countries to go on and private sector in these countries to be able to face the effect of climate change and to let the economy more resilient. And in this context, the experiences we had on CDM, etc., was deficient, linked to the complexity of the process for developing countries. And we see now, after this nice year, Paris, etc., and Marrakesh, that we are going back to something which seems complex. I'm speaking about the ITMO, the Article 6, in which nothing is clear, going to market and not vulnerability adaptation and the mechanism to evaluate, to monitor all this. We have nothing. I don't want to be pessimist, but I want just to let in balance two big problems we have. This United States involvement, which is very important, but even with this, we still have a lot to do. And private sector, that's why in Morocco, for example, private sector decided to launch this initiative, because enterprises in Morocco or in developing countries must first of all be aware of des enjeux, what is challenge of climate for their development, to have the knowledge of the tool which could be used, etc., but not only government. I'm speaking about SME, I'm speaking about economy actors in the country. Thank you.
Hiro, you want to add to that?
Yeah, okay. Just a simple, the final message. The climate change is a global issue. And because of the complication behind the system, this forum originally started from the system like Kyoto, which is just only fraction of the countries are getting the numerical target obligations. But we learned that does not end up with any new result. That's a reason why the Paris Agreement invited more than 190 countries to join. But it's relatively weak form. It's relatively more general form. But contribution of each individual countries up to their own the wish is going to make the final result. So the sharing the view and moving forward is very important, regardless of any country take some different position because of the domestic political situation, because of the democracy changes the year after year. The business can uniquely contribute to this the process because we are kind of a cross-country activity the participant. We are particularly the technologies and the products are the flying over the borders of the countries. So the single country can make a huge difference, not only the domestic process, but also the global base. If they come up with a very nice product, nice service, nice incentive for the people to move forward or the change the life. So in that sense, inclusion of a business interest and the discuss about how the business can contribute, not only the country base, but also the global base, is probably the one of the aspects that this forum has not yet really integrated into the process. That's one of the message that the business can provide. That's my point.
And do we have any more comments from this end of the table, June?
Thank you very much. And the concerning the business engagement in this debate, as you pointed out, there is in the detail the detailed rule book of the market mechanism or transparency that is super complicated, and since this process is negotiation among parties, so business do not have a seat in the negotiation itself. But what is very much important is to have a lot of communication with the parties as a group And also in your own country, you need to talk with the government. You need to raise a voice that your voice needs to be, say, duly taken into account in developing the party's position. Because, when, from my personal experience, I quite often, say, observed the intervention from various parties, which do not have, how can I say, reflection of reality of the business activities. So they are talking about super complex, say, monstrous procedures or something that is ultimately killing the mechanism itself. So I was sometimes wondering whether they are making this intervention to kill the mechanism or to, say, develop the mechanism. So that kind of reality-backed intervention is quite important. And so that is my first point. And the second point, Thomas, thank you very much for, pointing out. My intention was, in order to achieve the long-term climate change mitigation objectives enshrined in Paris Agreement, we cannot achieve that with the current technologies. So we need to have super innovative technologies, and that technology is coming from private sector and also government R&D programs and so on. So I wanted to highlight that issue. I do not deny the importance of the other, the stakeholders. We have to do all. But in terms of technology development, the business role is, cannot be, overemphasized. So that was my point. Thank you.
Thomas, you want the last word? Because we're just about out of time.
Yeah, just 2 quick points. Well, with this statement, I fully agree, of course. And I just wanted to add that, this complexity of negotiations in Article 6 in particular might probably be resolved that people see this article as the opportunity for the few to make money on what many would be doing, which is, in my view, personal view, not quite correct. Because this article is not about markets or non-markets. This article is about incentivizing cooperation. This article is about doing things together. And this is this additional time, I believe, that is needed for parties to find out what are they discussing and what is how strong incentivizing of cooperation can be, and incentivizing in general. I can say, just before I came here, I was sharing the facilitative sharing of views, which was the presentation of reports from, including the presentation of reports from India. Thanks to the scale of action, thanks to incentivizing the change, the transition, they managed to arrive at the reduction of price of the solar PV panels, I think 6 times. It went 6 times down, which is almost 80%. That's the power of incentivizing. So parties have to make this transition themselves. They agreed on something in Paris, but now they need more time. Thank you. Hopefully.
Thank you, Thomas. On that hopeful note, I think we'll conclude the event because I think we're running actually a little over. I hope you will join me in thanking our panelists and our responders. And you can get the presentations at the website that you see up on the screen, www.majoreconomiesbusinessforum.org. And thank you all for attending today.
Yeah.